The life of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien has been filled with many adventures and achievements, from being a veteran of the First World War to being a world-renowned author. And well-known, he has even created an entire fantasy world called Middle-earth. Tolkien was born on January 3rd, 1892, in Bloemfontein, South Africa. At the age of 3, his father died of rheumatic fever. That is when his mother and his younger brother Hilary went to go live with his grandparents at King's Heath, Birmingham, in London. After being educated at home, he went to King Edward's School and later went to St. Philip's School. Later, he returned to King Edward's School because he had gotten a foundation scholarship. 1 year later, in 1904, his mother died of acute diabetes. After his mother died, he went to live with and be raised by his mother's friend, Friar Francis Xavier Morgan at Birmingham Oratory. After a couple of years, he enrolled at Exeter College at Oxford. He went there to study the classics, but in 1903, he changed his major to study English. After 2 more years at Exeter, he graduated top of his class. Nearly a year later, in 1916, he married the love of his life, Edith Mary Brett, who originally fell in love when they were 16. But his guardian, Father Morgan, had asked him to wait until he was 21 years of age. So in 1913, he continued his relationship with Edith and got engaged to her. They got married at St. Mary's Immaculate Roman Catholic Church in Warwick. In 1916, he went to serve in the World War I on the Western Front. Now, Tolkien didn't join up right away, but eventually he did go to war on the Western Front. Unfortunately, after 4 months of service, he had contracted trench foot and was sent back to England, where he spent the next month recovering in a hospital in Birmingham. He was able to return to active military duty, but due to his condition, he had to stay behind in the camp, but he had done enough to help around to make lieutenant. After he left the army, he and his wife had 4 kids together: Christopher, John, Priscilla, and Mitchell. J.R.R. Tolkien started his writing career in 1913 when he wrote his first poem at Exeter College. He also produced a Middle English vocabulary in 1925. He started working at Oxford as a Royalism and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon in 1932. He wrote The Hobbit, and it was published in 1937. J.R.R. Tolkien came up with the idea for The Hobbit one day when he was grading papers. While he was correcting a student's paper, he suddenly stopped writing, and he wrote on the student's paper, "In a hole there lived a hobbit." After he wrote that, he asked himself, what is a hobbit and why does it live in a hole? That is what sparked the idea for the book called The Hobbit. That is how many of J.R.R. Tolkien's books have started. Take, for example, The Lord of the Rings, which came out in a 3-book series. The first book was called Fellowship of the Ring, the second book was called The Two Towers, and final book in the series was called Return of the King. Not only had J.R.R. Tolkien created a book, but he had also created an entire fantasy world called Middle-earth, along with creating multiple languages such as Elvish and Orcish. These books are not just books. These books are J.R.R. Tolkien's legacy. His books have also been transformed into a movie series along with creating a video game. When Tolkien was writing these books, he had thought to himself, there's no mythology anymore. So he decided to make his own mythology. Now, he had already started this mythology with The Hobbit, but he wanted to expand it. So he took mythology of dwarves, elves, and hobbits from different countries and put them into his writings. He took the dwarves from Germany, the elves from Scotland, and the hobbits from England. And he made an amazing book that sold over 1 million copies. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien may be known for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but he's also written a few other books such as Lay of Artol and Ichern, which is a 580-line poem that J.R.R. Tolkien had published in 1938, and he published the Welsh Review in 1940, and he also wrote the Poems and Songs of Middle-earth. This book includes the songs such as Far Over the Misty Mountain Cold. He had published this in 1970. He also has written many other poems and stories. He also has gotten younger generations to read and inspired millions of people around the world to read and write, even after his death on the 2nd of September, 1973. He still has kept inspiring people to this day. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was buried with his wife, who died on November 29th in 1971. On their graves is a poem that J.R.R. Tolkien had written about him and his wife. After John Tolkien's death, his son Christopher had completed his father's work, which included a 5-volume history on Middle-earth.